It was supposed to be just another peaceful weekend getaway. A quiet camping trip deep in the forest, surrounded by towering trees, fresh mountain air, and the calm, steady presence of nature. For a tear-old Emily and her grandfather Walter, it was a tradition they both cherished. Every summer, without fail, they'd hitch up the old silver trailer, pack peanut butter sandwiches, fishing rods, and a stack of Emily's favorite books, and head off into the woods. It was their special time. No cell phones, no distractions. Just stories around a fire and the comfort of each other's company. But in the summer of 1998, something went wrong. And by Sunday evening, both of them were gone without a trace. When Walter and Emily didn't return home that Monday, it wasn't panic at first. Walter was known to extend their trips occasionally if the weather was good and Emily was enjoying herself. But as the days dragged on, and there was still no word, no calls, no sightings, not even a parked trailer on any nearby site, concern turned into fear. Authorities searched the surrounding areas, combing through forests, checking back roads, and calling out through quiet campsites. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No tracks leading anywhere. No vehicle. Just ... silence. Emily's parents were devastated. Walter had always been responsible, cautious to a fault, even. He was the kind of man who carried two maps, a flare gun, and a first aid kit, even for a short drive. The idea that he would take his granddaughter into the woods and disappear seemed impossible. But the days turned into weeks. The search teams eventually thinned out. Flyers turned yellow on telephone poles. And life moved forward, painfully and slowly, with more questions than answers. 7 long years passed. Most people had accepted the worst. Maybe they got lost and couldn't find their way back. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe wild animals. The theories floated through the town for years, but without evidence. It was all just speculation. The case quietly faded into the unsolved category, a file in a drawer, a name mentioned in hushed conversations when people passed the old family home, until one scorching afternoon in late July, when the water level at a local dam dropped just low enough to reveal something strange near the spillway. A park's maintenance crew was sent to inspect a blockage that had been messing with the water flow. From a distance, it looked like just another chunk of debris. But as they got closer, one of the workers froze. There, half submerged in the gaping mouth of the spillway, was a dented, moss-covered trailer. Not just any trailer, it was the exact same model that Walter had driven. Silver, rounded edges, small windows, beaten down by years of weather, but still very much intact. And somehow, despite being trapped in a giant cement funnel of rushing water for who knows how long ... it hadn't been completely destroyed. Authorities were called in instantly. Crowds gathered along the highway above the reservoir, watching as divers and cranes were brought in to carefully lift the wreck from the spillway. The operation took hours. No one was sure what they'd find inside. Some were expecting nothing but rust and mud. Others whispered about remains. But when the doors were finally pried open, what they discovered inside left everyone stunned and only deepened the mystery. Personal items were still inside. A broken thermos, a small pink backpack, a sketchbook with pages warped by water, but still readable, names written in crayon, drawings of trees and lakes. And perhaps most chilling of all, a photo, faded and wrinkled, of Walter and Emily smiling beside the trailer. The timestamp on the back read, June 11th, 1998. The day they left, but there was no sign of them. No evidence of foul play, no bodies, no clear clue as to how the trailer ended up in the spillway, or why no one had seen it there for all those years. The water level had risen and fallen many times since their disappearance. How could something so large and obvious just go unnoticed for so long? Investigators were baffled. Some speculated the trailer may have drifted in during a flood, slowly sinking into the structure over time. Others weren't so sure. The news spread quickly. Local stations picked up the story. True crime forums exploded with theories.
What was this?
Finally, the break everyone had been waiting for. Or just another haunting reminder that closure doesn't always come easily. The reappearance of the trailer also sparked new life into the investigation. Old case files were reopened. Witnesses were re-interviewed, and one peculiar detail stood out: a report from a fisherman 7 years ago, who swore he'd seen a trailer matching that description near the dam late one night. He was dismissed back then. Now, his words carried a different weight. But the biggest question of all remained: where were Walter and Emily? Were they still out there? Did something happen after the trailer separated from them? Or had they been in it all along and the evidence had simply washed away? There are no easy answers. What began as a beloved family tradition turned into a mystery that's haunted an entire community. And just when everyone thought the story had reached its quiet end, the dam gave up a secret it had been holding on to for years. One trailer, one discovery, and 1,000 new questions. What really happened to the girl and her grandpa on that summer trip? And why did the truth wait so long to come to the surface? Stick around, because what investigators uncovered next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this case. Emily and Walter were well known in their small town. Walter had lived there most of his life, a retired high school teacher. Soft-spoken, dependable, the kind of man who never missed a town hall meeting and always mowed his lawn on Saturday. Mornings after his wife passed away, his granddaughter Emily became the center of his world. They were inseparable. People often joked that she was more comfortable in hiking boots than she was at home. Emily loved camping, fishing, roasting marshmallows, not because of the activities themselves, but because she got to do them with her grandpa. They had a bond that people noticed, one of those rare, quiet connections built on love and routine. That summer, in 1998, everything seemed normal. They left on a Friday morning, waving goodbye to Emily's mom, who stood barefoot in the driveway with her coffee cup. She said later there was nothing strange. Walter smiled like always. Emily was excited and bouncing in the passenger seat of the truck. They had planned to camp by Glen Rock Lake, a remote but beautiful area surrounded by thick forest and steep hills, about 40 miles from town. Walter had gone there before. He liked it because it was isolated but not completely out of reach. Just peaceful enough to feel like an escape, but close enough to get help if needed. He'd even left a hand-drawn map on the kitchen table, showing the exact site they planned to stay. But when search teams arrived at that location days later, there was nothing. No signs of a campfire, no tire tracks, not even a broken branch. It was as if they'd never been there at all. Over time, odd details began to surface. A gas station clerk, about 15 miles from the dam, said he remembered seeing Walter and Emily on the day they vanished. They'd stopped for fuel and snacks. Emily had picked out a bottle of orange soda and some gummy worms. Walter paid with cash, like always. The timestamp on the receipt matched what the family expected: early afternoon. But then, the trail went cold. No other confirmed sightings, no phone calls, and no one could explain how they might have ended up near the dam, which was in a completely different direction from where they were supposed to be. The dam itself wasn't a place locals visited often. It was functional, built decades ago to manage the nearby river. The spillway, known unofficially as the drain, was massive, a perfectly round opening that funneled excess water into a concrete tunnel below. It had always been a little eerie, even on clear days. Kids told stories about things disappearing into it. Someone once threw in a watermelon just to watch it get sucked down whole. But it was fenced off, and warnings were posted all around. Most people stayed clear. That made the discovery of the trailer even more unsettling. Investigators began digging deeper, trying to piece together how it could have ended up in such a dangerous and hidden spot. The trailer itself had damage on one side, a dent near the wheel well, a shattered rear window. But there were no clear signs of an accident that could explain how it got into the water. The tow hitch was snapped, which raised more questions. Had it broken loose from the truck? Had someone pushed it in on purpose? Or did something happen on the road that night that forced Walter to veer off course? One theory was that Walter had gotten lost. Some said maybe he took a wrong turn in the dark and ended up by the dam by mistake. But others, who knew him well, said that didn't sound right. He was meticulous with directions, always carried paper maps and a compass. And he was protective of Emily. He would never put her near a place like that. Then there was the issue of the truck. It was never found. Not in the dam, not in the woods, not at the bottom of any nearby lake. Just ... gone. If the trailer had somehow ended up in the spillway, what happened to the vehicle that was towing it? Could it have been taken, stolen, or was it hidden somewhere that no one had looked yet? As the investigation picked up again, Emily's family was pulled back into the emotional storm they'd tried so hard to move past. Her mother, now older and quieter, still held on to hope. In interviews, she said she never fully believed they were gone, that she always felt like Emily was still out there, somewhere. But even she couldn't ignore the strange pieces of this puzzle. The trailer appearing after 7 years. The items inside left untouched. And one item that wasn't on any of the original packing lists. A small, rusted key found taped under the sink. No one could figure out what it unlocked. It wasn't for the trailer. It didn't match any family vehicles or storage lockers. It seemed completely random. But someone, possibly Walter, had hidden it there intentionally. That detail, though small, changed everything. It meant there were still secrets no one had uncovered. And maybe, just maybe, a reason the trailer had stayed hidden for so long. Online, the case picked up attention from amateur sleuths and mystery enthusiasts. Some dug through weather records from 1998, trying to track storms or floods that could have moved the trailer. Others analyzed satellite images, comparing water levels year by year. A few people even visited the dam themselves, trying to retrace Walter's possible route and look for tire marks or forgotten clues. But as the weeks passed, no new answers came. Just more theories, more questions. Some whispered about the possibility that Walter had been running from something, that maybe he knew something no one else did. Others believed they'd been followed, or that someone else had been out in those woods that weekend. A third group thought the trailer had been moved after they disappeared, hidden, and then dumped in the spillway later to throw people off. What was certain was this: the discovery of that trailer had reopened a case, long believed to be buried by time and distance. It had pulled old wounds to the surface and stirred up a mystery more complex than anyone first realized. And as investigators continued to dig into the past, one thing became clear: nothing about Walter and Emily's last trip could be taken. At face value, they vanished without a trace. And then, 7 years later, the one thing that shouldn't have come back did. But the real story was just beginning. Because once authorities traced the origin of that mysterious key, everything started to shift, and what they found next changed everything. The key became the new center of everything. It was small, copper-colored, worn from age and exposure. Investigators had nearly missed it. Taped beneath a sink, in a place so hidden, it clearly hadn't been meant for anyone to find easily. That, alone, said something. Walter was a practical man, the type who didn't do anything without a reason. If he hid that key, it meant he was trying to protect something, or someone. The key didn't match anything tied to the family, so detectives expanded the search. They went through every storage facility within a 50-mile radius of the camping route Walter might have taken. Day after day, the leads came up empty, until one facility on the outskirts of a neighboring town finally responded. A unit had been registered under a fake name 7 years earlier and had gone unpaid for just as long. The paperwork was thin. No phone number, just a mailing address that led to a now-demolished house. But the lock on the unit matched the key. The storage unit was dusty, silent, and felt like a time capsule the second it opened. Inside were old camping supplies, a toolbox, a couple of gasoline containers, and in the back, sealed under a heavy canvas tarp, was something none of them expected: stacks of old maps and journal pages, all in Walter's handwriting. They were detailed and layered with notes in the margins. It was like he had been tracking something: paths through the woods, unusual landmarks, even hand-drawn sketches of symbols on trees. And repeatedly, across several pages, the same word appeared: Echo Point. No one knew what it meant. There wasn't a marked place by that name on any official map, but Walter had written about it often. Echo Point, return by sundown. Too quiet today. Saw movement near old fire pit. Emily said she heard something, voices, but no people. These weren't just travel notes. They were observations, warnings, almost. The more they read, the more it seemed like Walter had been investigating something long before that final camping trip, something he never told the family about. Emily's mother was shaken by the discovery. She said Walter had started acting more protective around that time, triple-checking locks, going on long drives alone, not sharing as much. She'd chalked it up to grief after his wife passed, but now everything felt different. Maybe he'd found something out there. He wasn't supposed to. And maybe that's what led to the disappearance. The maps led authorities to a lesser-known section of the forest, away from the main trails. The area had long been overgrown, and the landscape had shifted with time, but some of Walter's landmarks still stood: a hollowed tree stump, an old rusted water pump, a small rock formation shaped like a triangle. Following the markings, the search team eventually came across the remains of what looked like an abandoned campsite. Not Walter's trailer, but something else, older, makeshift, and clearly deserted in a hurry. Bits of cloth, burnt wood, a spoon melted into ash. It was eerie and quiet. No animals, no birds, just the rustling of leaves and the sound of distant wind. They found another photo there, this time folded up under a loose rock. It was of Emily, sitting near what looked like the same hollowed tree they'd just passed. She looked younger in the photo, maybe a year before she vanished. But the image had never been seen before by her family, which begged the question: who took it, and why was it hidden here? The deeper they dug, the stranger things became. A retired ranger who had worked in that region decades ago came forward after seeing a news report. He said there were always rumors about that stretch of forest, hikers hearing voices, equipment going dead for no reason, even a few reports of people going missing, though nothing ever stuck long enough to raise alarms. He remembered Walter, too. Said he'd asked about that same area once. Quiet guy, very polite. Asked a lot of questions about land use and old trails that hadn't been maintained in years. The ranger's story only added another layer to the puzzle. If Walter was asking about forgotten parts of the forest, why? Was he chasing a local legend, trying to map a place people had long stopped visiting? Or was he trying to keep Emily safe from something he thought was real? Meanwhile, back in town, Emily's mother started receiving anonymous letters. No return address, just a few words typed on old paper, each one delivered a few days apart. The first read, "You shouldn't have looked." The second, "Echo Point is not a place, it's a warning." The third simply said, "She remembered." Investigators analyzed the letters for fingerprints, DNA, anything. Nothing useful came up, but the messages were too specific to be a coincidence. Whoever was sending them new details that weren't public, that meant someone had been watching, maybe for years, and all the while, the trailer itself sat in a secure location, now fully dried and examined. Hidden beneath one of the cabinets, they found something else, a small music player, corroded by time, but recoverable. The tech team managed to extract a few minutes of audio. Most of it was static. But then, softly, the voice of a child. Emily, she was singing something, a lullaby. Then her voice cut off. A man, likely Walter, could be heard saying, "Don't move. Just stay quiet." And then silence. No one spoke for a long time after hearing that clip. It felt like a frozen moment, a real, living echo from that final night. A sliver of truth, buried under years of confusion. As the investigation continued, two stories began to unfold at once. One about a grandfather trying to protect his granddaughter from something he didn't fully understand. And another about a place hidden in plain sight where time seemed to work differently. And memories had a way of fading unless you were careful to hold on to them. Emily and Walter still hadn't been found. But the mystery was growing deeper. With every turn, whatever was waiting at the end of that trail, whatever Echo Point truly was, it wasn't finished with them yet. Because the final piece, the one no one saw coming, was still out there. And when it surfaced, it would change everything. The search team returned to the forest, this time with more urgency. The new discoveries, the trailer, the journal pages, the key. And now the audio recording had pushed the case into something more than just a cold disappearance. This was no longer a simple missing persons report. Something about this area and this case was different. Everyone felt it. Even the seasoned investigators who had worked dozens of strange files before admitted there was something about the atmosphere around Echo Point that made your skin tighten. Like the air carried memories that didn't belong to the present. They moved quietly, following the hand-drawn maps from Walter's notes, checking for landmarks with fading light pressing through the trees. The forest here didn't feel right. There were strange breaks in the natural sounds, like moments when even the birds refused to sing. Some places still looked exactly like Walter had sketched them 7 years ago. Untouched by time. Others had changed entirely, as if they had never existed at all. The deeper they went, the more everything began to feel ... warped. One of the officers, a young deputy named Colin, noticed something odd along a narrow path. Tree bark had been peeled in perfect vertical lines, almost like someone or something had been marking their way. Not just one or two trees, but several, spaced out in even intervals. Each mark seemed to guide the group further into the dense woods. They followed them cautiously, radios on, flashlights ready, none of them speaking above a whisper. The silence was heavy. No wind, no rustling leaves. Only the crunch of boots on damp ground and the low hum of tension in everyone's chest. Then, they found the shoes. A pair of small, water-damaged sneakers sitting side by side near the base of an old oak. Children's size. Worn, faded pink laces. Emily's mother later confirmed through blurry photographs that they matched the ones Emily wore the day she vanished. But what chilled everyone wasn't just the shoes, it was how clean the space around them looked, like someone had placed them there on purpose. No dirt on the soles, no animal tracks nearby. Just sitting, untouched, in the middle of a trail no one had walked in years. The team pressed forward. Every step now carried weight. They felt closer than they'd ever been. GPS signals began to glitch the deeper they went. Compass needles jittered in strange loops. Cameras recorded short bursts of static before clearing again. But still, they continued. They came upon what looked like an old shelter. Built out of branches and canvas, half collapsed from weather and time. Inside, more remnants drawings on scraps of paper, a cracked flashlight. a bottle of water that looked like it hadn't moved in years. And just beyond it, tucked under a rock ledge, they found something that froze the entire team. A photo. Slightly burned at the corners, but still visible. A man, unmistakably Walter, standing with a young girl, Emily. But they didn't look like. The day they vanished, they looked older. Emily's hair was longer. Walter had more wrinkles. And behind them in the background was a landscape no one could quite place. Rocky, jagged, almost like a canyon, but not one from anywhere nearby. The photo didn't make sense. It shouldn't have existed. Investigators tried to understand it. Logically, maybe it was digitally altered. Maybe it was faked to throw them off. But the physical print, the aging of the paper, the matching camera used to take the other photos in the trailer, it all checked out. The photo was real. And it suggested one terrifying possibility, that Walter and Emily had still been alive. After they disappeared, maybe even for years. But how and where? The only theory that began to make any sense came from Walter's own notes. Echo Point wasn't just a place. 'Twas an area where things seemed to shift. Walter had written of seeing trails that weren't there the day before, of walking in circles despite having a compass, of hearing Emily speak behind him only to turn and find her silent, standing still. He had tried to map the shifting terrain, but each attempt failed. The place didn't obey natural rules. That night, the team set up camp, unwilling to travel further in the dark, but even resting felt uneasy. Radios picked up faint whispers, words no one could make out. One member swore they heard a child's laugh far off in the trees. Another claimed their watch jumped ahead 2 hours while they were wide awake. No one could explain it. But by morning, the air was different. Heavy. Still, the team decided to press forward one last time. Following the strange energy that now guided them more than any map or tool, they reached a clearing. Quiet, untouched, with a small pond in the center that shimmered oddly, almost like it was reflecting something beyond the sky. Around the edge were marking symbols carved into the stone that matched Walter's sketches from the journal. It was the place, Echo Point, or whatever it had become, and there, lying beside the pond, half buried under moss and thyme, was something impossible to ignore. A single camping chair, folded, rusted. Familiar, it matched the set from Walter's trailer. They approached slowly. On the ground near the chair was another recording device, weathered and damp, but still functional. The first few seconds were static, then a click, then Walter's voice, older, slower, strained. "We found something here. Something we shouldn't have. I don't know how long we've been in it. Time isn't right. I don't think anyone will find this, but if they do, don't come further. Don't let her hear you. She remembers too much now." Then it cut off. And in the next moment, the stillness of the clearing broke. One team member screamed, swearing. They saw movement in the trees. Another's flashlight flickered out, and somewhere, faint but clear, a voice whispered. It was a child's voice, soft, familiar, calling out a name. And it wasn't over. Not yet. The voice calling out from the trees brought everyone to a standstill. For a moment, no one moved. The clearing was silent again, but the sound had been clear, not imagined, not a trick of the mind. It was a child's voice, soft and echoing, as if carried through the trees by something unseen. One of the deputies whispered that it sounded like the name Grandpa, repeated faintly. Another swore he heard it say, "Help." It was enough to rattle even the most skeptical among them. These were trained search and rescue personnel, not prone to panic, but every instinct in that moment told them something was deeply wrong here. Something none of their training had prepared them for. The team made the quick decision to split. Not far, just within line of sight, to try and track the direction of the voice. Flashlights cut through the dimming daylight, sweeping across the dense undergrowth. The air felt heavier with every step, like it was pressing in from all sides. Then, less than 50 yards from the clearing, one of the searchers found something. Else a child's sweater tangled in a bush. Bright pink and blue, still recognizable despite years of wear and weather. Emily's favorite, confirmed later by her mother through old photos. But it wasn't tattered, it wasn't shredded or rotted, it looked recently worn. As if someone had been here, not 7 years ago, but maybe 7 days ago. Or even more recent, the tension was now unbearable. Radios crackled with static. The lead investigator ordered a regroup back at the clearing. As the team gathered, trying to process what they'd found, one of them noticed something off with the pond in the center. The water, which had been perfectly still moments earlier, was now rippling, not from wind, but from underneath, like something was disturbing it from below. They shined lights over the surface, scanning for movement. Then they saw it. Not a creature, not a person, but a reflection that didn't match anything standing around the pond. A figure, standing tall, unmoving, deep in the trees behind them. But when they turned around, no one was there. Back in town, word of the second discovery, the photo, the chair, the sweater, spread quickly. News stations picked up the story again. Headlines lit up online forums. Lost girls' clothing found years later. Voices heard. At Echo Point, rescue teams report unexplained phenomena in forest near Dam Spillway. Everyone had a theory. Some thought it was a psychological trick caused by the intensity of the case. Others leaned into the supernatural. But Emily's mother, she believed something different. She remembered a story Walter once told her when she was young. A strange tale about the woods. How the land out there didn't like being disturbed. How there were places where time ran differently, like ripples in a stream. At the time, she thought it was just an old man's bedtime myth. Something to keep kids from wandering too far. But now, thinking back on Walter's growing paranoia, his quiet obsession with Echo Point, and the detailed drawings he left behind, she began to wonder if he'd discovered something very real and very dangerous. She brought a faded notebook. To investigators, something she'd found among Walter's belongings, but never paid much attention to. Inside were pages filled with timelines, not just of their family, but of events around the dam, the forest, even disappearances dating back decades. In the margins were notes connecting dates, places, and names. Circles around times of low water. At the dam, stars next to missing persons reports. It was clear Walter believed there was a pattern, cycle, something that happened every several years when the water receded and the land beneath the dam. And something deeper beneath Echo Point stirred. Then came the second twist. That same week, another trailer was reported missing, a silver one, nearly identical to Walter's, belonging to a couple who had recently camped not far from the forest's edge. They had vanished without a trace. Park rangers discovered their campsite abandoned. Their vehicle still there, but no sign of them. The trailer, however, was gone. The timing was too perfect. Similarities too sharp. The couple had no connection to Walter or Emily, but their disappearance mimicked the same strange patterns, as if something or someone was repeating a process, pulling people in one by one. Authorities now had to consider that this wasn't an isolated case, that Walter and Emily might not have been the only ones. And worse, whatever had taken them, whatever force or presence tied to this place, could still be active. Back near Echo Point, the search team continued combing the area for new clues. That's when they stumbled on a journal, not Walter's. This one was different, leather-bound, brittle, with entries dating back to the early 1970s. Inside were short, choppy notes about people hearing voices, strange time lapses, travelers going missing. One chilling entry read, "Don't follow. The lights, they don't lead out, they lead deeper." Another ended with, She remembers too much now. The land doesn't forget. That phrase again. She remembers. It kept coming back, in Walter's notes, in the anonymous letters, in the journal buried beneath the rock ledge. What did it mean? Who was she? Was it Emily? Or something else entirely? One theory began to take root, something terrifying and hard to accept. What if Emily hadn't just been lost out there? What if, somehow, she had become part of whatever was in that forest? Not just trapped, but changed. The voice calling Grandpa may not have been a cry for help, but a lure. And if that was? True, if the child's voice and the belongings left behind were part of a pattern, then the people who went missing recently might not be the last. The investigators didn't share that theory publicly. Not yet. But off the record, a few admitted something didn't feel right anymore. The deeper they got into the case, the more they felt like they were being watched, not the other way around. Like the land itself was aware of their presence. And each step forward wasn't uncovering answers. It was triggering something. Older, something waiting. The stakes were no longer just about finding Emily and Walter. They were about stopping whatever had taken them before it took someone else. And the final piece of the puzzle, the part that would shake the entire investigation, hadn't even surfaced yet. It was just after sunrise when everything changed. After days of searching and nights filled with confusion, the team decided to return to Echo Point one last time. This time with a full support unit, more eyes, more gear, and a determination to bring closure to a case that had haunted a town for nearly a decade. Emily's mother insisted on being there too. She said she had to see the place herself to feel whatever had drawn her father and daughter so far into the woods that they'd never come home. There was something inside her, an instinct that she couldn't explain, telling her this would be the final time she'd have to wonder. The sun was barely above the trees when the fog rolled in. It wasn't forecasted. The air had been cleared just minutes earlier, but the fog came in fast, curling around the trees and swallowing up sound. Radios cut out, compass needles spun. Even cell phones froze. Still, they kept moving, driven by the notes, the maps, and Walter's voice from the last recording. They reached the pond again, the same one where the chair had been found, now eerily calm. The same stones, the same markings. Everything felt frozen in place. But something was different this time. A low vibration in the ground. It's barely noticeable. But there, and then, out of the fog, a figure stepped forward. At first, no one dared move. The shape was small, slight but upright, walking with quiet, steady steps. As the mist thinned just enough, the group gasped. It was Emily. She looked older than she should have. Not quite a teenager, but not the same little girlhood. Gone missing at 8. Her hair was longer, tangled with leaves. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy but alert. She stopped at the edge of the pond and looked directly at her mother. And then she said something no one expected. He stayed behind so I could leave. For a moment, there was silence. Her mother ran to her, arms out, heart racing with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Emily didn't flinch. She let herself be held. She whispered again, "He's still there." He said the land doesn't let go unless it takes something in return. The investigators swarmed, not with cameras, not with questions, but just trying to make sure she was okay, checking vitals, giving her water, wrapping her in blankets. But Emily didn't say much else. She seemed exhausted, distant, like her mind had been somewhere else for too long. And behind her, the fog began to lift, slowly, revealing more of the forest floor. And what looked like a trail leading deeper into the trees. They followed it. The trail curved in impossible ways, looping back on itself, but somehow leading forward. After 20 minutes, they came to a small, open space. A fire pit, long cold, a folding chair, and a figure, still and silent, sitting in it. It was Walter. He was older now, frail, but alive. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. But when they called his name, he opened his eyes. Barely a flicker of recognition passed through him when he saw Emily had returned. He smiled just slightly and said only one thing before falling unconscious. She made it. They airlifted both of them out within hours. The news spread like wildfire. Missing girl found after 7 years in forest. Grandfather discovered alive at remote site. Rescue defies logic at known danger zone. Media stations ran the story for weeks. Interviews poured in, but neither Emily nor Walter shared much more. Walter never fully recovered from the ordeal. He passed away 6 months later, peacefully, quietly, and with a small smile on his face. Holding a photo of Emily beside the trailer from years ago, Emily's recovery was slow but steady. She relearned routines, adjusted to normal life, but her nights were often restless, and she never returned to the woods again. When asked by reporters what happened during those years, she gave the same soft answer each time. Time doesn't move the same there and the place. It remembers everything. Investigators closed the case with the facts they could verify. A miraculous return, a man's survival against all odds, and a mystery of nature and isolation. But among themselves, they admitted they didn't fully understand what happened out there. There were too many gaps, too many things that didn't follow logic. And then, months later, long after the media attention had died down, a park ranger found something while surveying the far end of the reservoir. The water had dropped again, lower than usual, and in the deep curve of the spillway, wedged tightly against the wall, was a second trailer. Not the missing one from Walter's case. Not the one reported missing recently. This one was older, much older, and when they opened it, they found objects that hadn't seen sunlight in over 40 years. A photo, a journal, and a page with a child's drawing. In the corner, scribbled in faded pencil, was a name, Emily, only it wasn't signed by her. It was written to her, and the date at the bottom. June 3rd, 1954. No one could explain it. And just like that, the mystery was no longer about what had happened. It was about how many times it had happened before. For weeks after the discovery of the second trailer, investigators worked in quiet disbelief. The condition of the trailer, its contents, the date on the letter, it was all impossible. And yet, it was real. The materials were verified. The paper dated correctly. The trailer had clearly been submerged or hidden for decades. But there was no record of a girl named Emily from the 1950s who had ever gone missing in that area. No matching case, no known relatives, just a letter with her name, as if whoever wrote it knew she would one day exist. And somehow, that letter had waited tucked away through time for her to return. Emily didn't want to see it at first. She was still recovering, still trying to understand what was real and what was memory. But eventually, she asked to read it. It was short. Just a few sentences written in a child's handwriting. Emily, if you're reading this, don't stay too long. It listens. It learns. It won't forget again. There was no signature. Just a drawing. A stick figure of a girl and an older man standing beside a round pond with trees all around. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She simply folded the paper, held it close, and whispered, "Someone else tried to get out to..." Her mother took her home after that, back to a quiet life. No more interviews, no more news stories, just family dinners, long walks near the beach, and soft music in the evenings. Sometimes Emily would draw. Not the woods, not the trailer, but faces. People no one else recognized. When asked, she'd say softly, they were there too. The town slowly returned to normal. Search teams were disbanded. Echo Point was officially marked off limits, and all nearby trails were closed indefinitely. The dam's maintenance crews were instructed to monitor water levels closely. Any further drop would trigger another investigation. But deep down, those who had seen the clearing, heard the voice, or touched the water, knew that some places don't operate by the same rules. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't prove it. But they knew. Walter's funeral was simple. A few family members, some old neighbors. A quiet song played at the end, one he used to hum when walking with Emily near the woods. The photo of the two of them sat beside the casket, not the one from the day they vanished, but the strange one, the one found in the woods where they looked older and tired, but still together. Still holding on. People in town still talk about him, often with admiration. He was the kind of man who would have done anything for his granddaughter. And he did. In the end, he gave her what little time he had left so she could have a future. He stayed behind when the forest wouldn't let them both go. Some say he bargained with it. Others believe he found a way through because of how much he loved her. Whatever it was, it worked. She came back. The mystery of the dam's spillway, the missing trailers, and the strange markings in the forest never reached a full explanation. Scientists proposed theories: natural gas leaks causing hallucinations, magnetic anomalies confusing compasses, water erosion altering the landscape. None of it matched the emotional weight of what really happened. None of it explained the voices, the pictures, the old journal entries. The letter from 1954. It was like the land had a memory of its own, and every few decades it reached out and pulled someone in. Emily never went near the woods again. But every year on the anniversary of her return, she'd light a small candle and place it by the window. She never explained why. Her mother would ask gently, but Emily would just say, "It's for the ones who didn't make it back." One year, when she was about 18, she mailed a sealed envelope to the local police department. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, with a trail marked in red ink leading away from Echo Point, curving past the pond and into an uncharted section of the forest. At the bottom of the map was a note: "There's still one more. I don't know their name, but I heard them calling." It was enough to send another team into the forest. They didn't find another person, but they did find something unexpected. A backpack. Inside it was a Polaroid, faded nearly to white. But when they tilted it just right under the sun, you could make out a shadow, a person standing in the distance, their hand raised like they were waving. No one could identify them. No one knew when the photo was taken, but it matched the kind of film used in the 1980s. Another piece of someone's forgotten past. In the end, the story of Emily and Walter became something bigger than a mystery. It became a reminder of how strong love can be, how sometimes people will do the impossible for those they care about. It also reminded the town and anyone who heard their story that not all places want to be understood. Some places just are. They don't follow rules. They don't need to make sense. They just exist, holding pieces of people, moments in time, and secrets too old to name. And somewhere, deep in the forest, where the trees grow tall and the ground never seems to dry, there's still a faint whisper now and then. A child's voice. A familiar song. And every so often, someone passing through will swear they hear laughter that doesn't belong to anyone in sight. But if you ask Emily about it now, years later, she'll just smile gently and say, "It's just the forest." Remembering. And maybe that's all the answer we ever needed.